Hi there, welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Cantan.
And I'm Dave Higgins.
And this episode we're going to be talking about staying patient even when progress is slow. But before we do that, we'll go through our usual weekly progress update. And Dave, you can go first.
Okay, another episode of...
Hi there, welcome to the Nitty Gritty Writing Podcast. I'm Simon Cantan.
And I'm Dave Higgins. It appears that YouTube decided to talk over the top of me. What I say? Yes, another episode of Seven Stones, done and up in various places. Finished the major redraft Sorcery. It's only a minute ago that you told me what it was called. I can remember that one.
Just making sure.
Also we had a leak in our kitchen, so lots of my writing time this week has been spent with my head stuck in a cupboard listening for drips, or lying underneath a cupboard with a series of towels trying to dry the floor out enough that I could actually try and spot where the water was coming in the first place, which might have constituted to my thingamy word, begins with A, ends with A, means you can't remember stuff. So yeah, Sorcery's done, Seven Stones done. That's it for me.
For me, I am writing Fields of Dust, which is the post-apocalyptic book. I did about 15,000 words this week, which is actually a bit slow. A year ago, we were doing episodes of Green Star and 10,000 words was pretty fast. Now, with the way I've kind of done my scheduling and stuff like that, 15,000 is a bit slow for a week. And I did a cover for it, and that's about it. The cover I made, I'm kind of struggling because we just paid for covers for Dragons and Magic, the 3 books there. And so the 2 other books I've got coming out in autumn, I don't know how I can pay for professional covers, even though I really, really want to, because it's kind of important. So at the moment, I've made covers for them myself, and they'll have to do for, if I absolutely cannot find someone to do a cover or find the money to do a cover, then I'll do that. And the one little thought I had during the week, which is the most unromantic way to think of books ever, but it's to do with covers, is if you went into a grocery store and you wanted to buy washing powder and you saw a box that looked like a washing powder box, so you bought it and took it home and opened it and it had steaks inside, then you would be irked and disappointed, even though you might like steak.
And having this free steak.
And vice versa, if you wanted to buy washing powder and the box had steaks on it, even though you might be interested in steaks otherwise, you wouldn't buy it because you wouldn't know that there was washing powder inside. And that's the same kind of thing about covers at the moment, at least, is my kind of thought. So I went to the post-apocalyptic page on Amazon, and they're all a desolate wasteland with a person or sometimes multiple people facing away from the camera. Every single one, pretty much. The only one that wasn't was Wool, Hugh Howey's Wool. And that's famous, so I mean it'll get away with not having the same cover as everyone else, which either means that having stereotypical covers is leaked out so much that everyone's doing it, so it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, or that it's completely true that readers are looking for the equivalent of a washing powder type of box. They want to know what something is before they even look at it. So yeah, that was my random unromantic thought about books this week, that they're the same as washing powder. So we can get on with our topic. So The way I think of this particular topic is there's two kind of things. There's writing the book and wanting it to be finished as quickly as possible. And there is a writing career in general and wanting to be further along than you currently are. And those are two quite separate things usually. I mean, usually people can't make a writing career out of one book, so you're talking about multiple books. So to take the first one first, it is quite a tricky issue. The books take a long time to write, even unless you're. There was someone mentioned on the self-publishing podcast's boot camp this week that wrote 45,000 words in a day. Unless you're that person, you will take a bit longer to write a novel than one day. So you have to kind of maintain the attitude that it's a marathon rather than a sprint, which is a cliche, but I guess it's a cliche for a reason. The one thing I would say is beneficial is tracking everything. I know some people don't like the idea of tracking absolutely every minute they work and every word they write and stuff like that, but it has been beneficial for me because it means you can see how long something takes, and you don't have really, at least I don't have perspective on how long a book is actually taking in hours, elapsed hours. So if you have a problem like Dave just had with the leaking pipes, you think, because you're just saying, I started this book in March and it's now June, this book is taking forever. You're not taking account of the fact that you might have lots of things going on in your personal life that are making it take forever. And it might actually be going faster in terms of elapsed hours spent on it. What are your thoughts, Dave?
I go the other way on the issue of recording. Feeling behind was one of the reasons why I stopped micro recording. If you know how you're going, then for me, that means the bit of me that's analytical can go, well, you did 1,563 words the last day that there was a leak in your bathroom. The leak in your kitchen is smaller, but you've only written 973 words today, so you're behind. And so if I record things in too much detail, it gets into my head that these are the minimum benchmarks rather than these are just data points.
Yeah, I guess it is kind of as everything, it's a difference in from person to person. Where for me, if I go into my tracking thing and it says you're currently at 2,798 words for the day, and I might have gone home, I will then say, okay, well, it's 202 words and I'll have made 3,000, a nice round number. So then I'll stay longer. Whereas I wouldn't compare to the day before. I'd be more looking to kind of round out the numbers or something like that. Like, rather than, like, if I have a day where I bunk off and only write 1,000 words because something's going on, I wouldn't look back at that day at all. At least not until the book is completely finished. Then I'll kind of go, okay, in total, how many words did I write? How many words did I publish for this book? How many hours did it take of each of editing and writing and outlining, all the rest of it, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's definitely a personality thing. Like if you're going to obsess about this isn't good enough because I've done better before, then it's obviously not a good idea to track in that detail. Or to track something different, maybe track the minutes you spent or something like that. Or one thing I did track was that I found was quite useful is published words. So you take how many words you publish of the final book, and how many hours it took, and then you could work out how many published words you got per minute for that book, which is not something you can change on a particular day, but it's something you can manipulate in your process, that you can say, okay, well, this book I spent longer outlining and it took less time, or I spent longer outlining, it took more time, or whatever it happens to be. But I think I've mentioned before that every single book I ever write, at about the 27,000 word mark or 30,000 word mark, because my books are usually about 60k to 70k, I always lose faith in the book. And at that point, it can be difficult to kind of be patient and keep plowing away. It's only experience that I know that the books themselves, when they come out the other end, may be completely fine, like people enjoy reading them. So what if you don't use tracking, Dave, what strategies do you use to maintain your momentum, to keep persisting?
Mostly for me, it's sheer bloody mindedness that I want to get the book done. That means writing. That means getting things done by a certain date. So I estimate how long things take me to do. Add a small amount of time at the end for unseen eventualities, scale it back, and then aim for just those targets. So I'm writing to get each stage done before a certain date. And so first draft, redraft, edit, final polished copy, and so on. And I try not to move any of the other dates once I've set it. So I know that if my first draft runs over by a week, that's going to mean writing harder on the redraft because I've lost a week. And that motivates me to keep going in a way that, knowing, well, I've got to do this many words, or I've only done this many words, doesn't. So I pick the metric I'm going for depending on where I am. So if I'm aiming for a month's time, then for the first 2 weeks of the month, I'm thinking, well, I need to be halfway through-ish by the time I get here. But once I've written a first draft, it's maybe 100 A4 sides in word processor. So that's about 4 pages a day. So I'm aiming to be done in pages. And I'm always pushing myself to do slightly better than I need to on whatever metric I've chosen for the day. But I don't store the data in any way. So I'm not trying to beat a personal best for pages edited or words written. Because once I set the data down, my brain goes, well, that's what you can do. Like, okay, you've beaten that, so clearly every day should be faster than that. So I do measure, but I don't record the measurements in any way, and I change the measurement depending on where I am. So I might say, well, I've got a week to do these 5 pages, but 1 page a day for 5 days is silly. So I'll just try and do them all today with no pressure to actually get them done. And usually if it's just, well, I've got 5 pages to go, I can do that. So I get a lot faster when I get right to the end. We can actually see that finish line. So I think so for me, the motivation tricks are adding finish lines, giving my brain a reason to think, oh, we're almost there. So if it's today I'll edit 3 pages, then 2.5 pages in, it's, well, we're almost there, and it's done. And whereas if I've got to do like 20 pages by the end of the week, that seems, well, I've got 4 days left to do it, so I don't need to push myself hard.
Yeah, I mean, that's a key thing as well that I think I've mentioned before. When I have a day off work, I get less done than when I'm in work, because when I'm in work, I have exact amount of time. So there's no like playing a computer game or something like that, because there's no time to do it. It's either writing or nothing. And I mean, I've read about a study they did where a professor did an experiment and for one group he set weekly assignments, and for the other group, where each was worth X amount of their grade, and for the other he gave them a large assignment of the equivalent amount that was due at the end of the semester. And the weekly assignments did far, far better than the people who had one big assignment at the end of the semester, even though it was the same amount of work, because they had deadlines, the same as you're saying. Have you frozen, or are you just contemplating? Okay, Dave was frozen again. So moving on from, so the thing I wanted to mention, which is a kind of a crossover point, is that it can be frustrating because when you've written quite a lot of books, or more than 3, say, that that you need to get through the books in order to get to a certain point. Either you want to get a number into a series because you're maybe one common strategy is that the first one's permanently free, the second one is given away to the mailing list, which means that you have to get to book 3 before you're even earning any money. So then writing 3 books is a fair chunk of time. So for me, it's about 100 hours a book, so that's 300 hours. I know a lot of people takes them even longer than that. I write, as I say, fairly short novels. But that's kind of the reason for doing this topic is that I've learned a lot of stuff in the last months that mean, like for the covers that we mentioned earlier and that kind of stuff, that mean that I think I can make a book more successful, or a series more successful, than I have been doing in the past. So the most successful series I have is Bitter End, and that's had series readers, I think 500 or so, maybe a little bit more, which is by no means massive, especially I finished the last in the series last year, so that's about 2.5 years to get through that series writing wise, for the benefit of getting 500 readers. Obviously they all like the series, and that's really great, but I'd like to write something that's just as enjoyable for them but also reaches more readers, I guess is the way to put it. So the problem is then that I've got 5 books. I'm working on the 5th book of the year now, but even the books that are going to come out in the autumn, I want to have either the follow-up or at least a mailing list incentive done by that stage. So that means that from January to September, I've got nothing I can put out because I'm buffering stuff up so that it can have the most possible impact. greatest possible impact. And that can be quite difficult because there is a kind of an ego boost or a bump you get when you publish something, that you start getting reviews in. If it's from your fans, they generally tend to like the book, and that's kind of a boost that you can then use to write more stuff. But there comes a point where, so at the start, when I first started publishing, that would be an ideal thing to, like, at that point, I was not aware that I didn't know that my stuff was worth reading. So publishing something and finding out that people enjoyed reading it was something very beneficial. Whereas now I've stopped reading reviews for the most part, because the only thing that can happen is I'll either see someone enjoys the book, which is great, obviously, and that's a slight kind of boost, but then someone hates the book. They maybe just are not the ideal reader, that's fine, or they might point out something, and that's only going to throw me off course a little, because so for example, this week someone said that Hard Vacuum, the word Kyra, the name Kyra. Hey Dave, you're back again.
Yeah, there is something seriously wonky about the interaction of Google products and my computer, because I had to give up using Chrome because it didn't recognize my webcam. And now I'm using Firefox. It recognizes the webcam, but I still get the, hey, you're trying to use Hangouts. Would you like to use 110% of all of your processors at the same time? Oops, your system's fallen over.
That's almost like it. In my day job this week, we had a problem where a server was using all of its memory. Like, so an application would take 100% of the memory and nothing else would be able to run. And the application has a number in it where you can say what's the maximum amount of memory it's allowed to use. And so I was like trying to fix this. It couldn't work out why it wasn't working. And then a colleague came over and sat beside me and went, hey, isn't there an extra 0 in that number that shouldn't be there?
Ooh.
So instead of 90 gigabytes, it was using 900 gigabytes. So, yeah. So anyway, vaguely related. But I was saying that at the moment I'm kind of buffering stuff. So we have our Dragons of Magic series where we've chosen to write 3 stories. So the first one's just a short story or a novelette, and then 2 novels. And we haven't released any of them yet because we want to have all of them hit in one big kind of bang to increase the chance that people will move into the series. So if we just released Origin when we were finished it back in February or March, and then they would have to wait 2 months for Adventure, the majority of those people would have forgotten that it existed. They'd have read 10 books or something since then and wouldn't remember that they wanted to read the next one if they enjoyed Origin. Whereas if we release Origin and Adventure at the same time, and Sorcery is already on pre-order, or maybe even out, we'll see how we go, that they can go from the first one to the second one and then pre-order the third one, and everything gets done in one fell swoop so they don't forget about it if they want to read it. So yeah, so that the patience on my part at the moment is that is one thread that we're trying, and then I'm in 2 bundles, which the bundles potentially will drag in a lot of readers who might want to see my stuff. And if I really need to have some reason for them to sign up to my mailing list at least, so that I can then contact them when the next book in that series comes out if it's a success. So that means at least a short story or something in that world that I can say, hey, interested in what happened before this story, or what happens between this and the next book, or whatever, then I can get their email, so at least I can contact them. So I got that. I've also got to finish the Kairos Harren series, which has again, it starts with a kind of a novelette and then 2 novels. And I want to get a 3rd novel. There isn't all that many readers in that series. Only, it'll be in the hundreds, maybe 500, something like that at most. But I want to have like a round off the series, so they have a satisfying ending to it. So all of that means that I'm left kind of going, well, why can't I write faster? Why is it going to take me 9 months to get through that massive amount of work? Which can be quite difficult to keep your eyes on the long-term goal. I mean, I would say you're ultimately patient there, Dave, because you're writing 7 Stones. What part is it now? 153.
74.
Yeah.
74 I published today.
So that's 74 weeks in a row. And you're waiting until you've kind of rounded out a certain number of episodes and then releasing them, which again is something that takes some patience, to kind of wait until things are in place.
Yeah, it is tricky, because I have some print only fans, people who will sort of contact me to say, when's it coming out in paperback? And so holding on until I've finished it to release the paperback is hard, because paperbacks, unless you've got the ability to have a massive print run, are very expensive to do compared to ebooks. So releasing a paperback of 10 episodes isn't really a sensible decision unless you've got people who are happy to pay a huge amount for it, because the minimum price on print on demand is quite high. So it will be a very expensive pamphlet if I release the ebooks in print as well. But sticking to my original plan of releasing the entire thing as a paperback once it's finished gets harder every time sort of someone comes and goes, I'm really enjoying the 3 episodes. I'd love the paperback. When's it coming out? So, well, once I've finished the whole arc, and there's this whole sort of, yes, unfortunately.
How many episodes do you expect to have by the end, or is that just up in the air at the moment?
This is the thing. I mean, 74 episodes in, that people who write a lot expect that after doing 74 episodes, I'll know exactly how long it's going to go, and I don't, because I know where the story's going to go, but how long each of the chunks of plot to deal with a specific obstacle takes varies widely. So I could predict roughly how many words on average an episode is going to be, but how many episode chunks of average length it will take to get from a major point in the story to the next one is a lot harder to predict. saying they're on the 6th of the 7 stones now. So there's one more stone to go, and then the thing that happens afterwards, which I don't want to reveal yet. But hopefully people will feel it's a satisfying payoff for 7 quests worth of grief.
They woke up and it was all a dream.
Yeah. The idea that sort of they fix the 7th stone, there's a shimmering, and this man with a crappy life as a shoe salesman that wakes up having fallen asleep in the shower.
Or the Red Dwarf thing, where they're actually in a hologram, and you only got to level 4. Oh, you got all the way to level 7. You got the 7th stone. Well done.
It's horribly gritty and swords and sorcery. So I think it all turning out to be a little bit of a comic framing thing would probably lead to people hunting me down and killing me.
Justifiably so, I think.
Yeah, you could do a certain amount of actually it wasn't as horrible as it seemed because of this, but actually yes, it was all a hologram and it's a bit of a giggle. That wouldn't work.
No. But anyway, that's we're going off topic. So in terms of patience, I guess we're not giving any really good kind of tips other than just be patient, which is.
Well, it does vary from person to person. And for me, whenever I start thinking that, well, why hasn't my career taken off to like Stephen King levels? Why haven't I got like lots of series? Because my brain conveniently blanks out the decades when I was working huge amount of hours every day, so I wasn't writing anything at all. So my brain just goes, well, at your age, why haven't you got like 4 series completed? You could have done that easily. And I just remind myself that the book that is now gone because my amnesia has come back. Oh, crikey.
Sorcery?
I didn't start this sentence. It's not sorcery. Drat it. To Kill a Mockingbird. That was the only book she ever released until the other one came out last year.
Which was... The other one was like a rough draft for...
The other one was like a rough draft and a bit rough. And I don't actually like To Kill a Mockingbird that much. It's not badly written, but it's not the greatest novel ever for me.
I really enjoyed it, but I read it in school. So I don't know whether it was because just the time I read it or something, but yeah, but I liked it. I haven't read it in decades.
Yeah, there are some stories I loved when I read them in school that I come back to again and again, and others that just didn't do anything for me. And To Kill a Mockingbird, it's not badly. I can see why you'd get people to read it as an example of good writing, and I can see why you'd get people to read it as an example of that how someone could experience diversity and decide to take a stand against a problem in their society. But actually as a work of fiction rather than as a moral lesson or a writing primer, it just didn't click for me. And so I think, well, if one of if the author who wrote one of the most famous books in the world released one book and I didn't really like it, just counting how many books you've got out and how many times the Times Literary Supplement has reviewed your books isn't that useful a measure, because it's not measuring actually whether you're any good. It's measuring something that you can't control. If I wanted to be that famous, I'd have to focus on finding ways to be famous rather than ways to write. The actual writing bit, whilst you need to write as well as you want to, and whilst you need to write better books to hook more edge cases, doesn't make you famous. It's happening, it's to a certain extent luck that your book gets into the hands of someone who thinks it's great and has a platform to talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right that I think a better thing to focus on in terms of patience is getting to be a better writer, as you say. Like I've seen a lot of people this week because of the bootcamp thing, a lot of people asking questions like, I have a perma-free series starter and another book, and I'm not getting anyone, there's no one who's buying the next book. How do I get them to buy it? And there the question should be more, how can I get to the stage where people cannot stop themselves from buying it? They will, tear their way to Amazon, spending their food money to get that book because it's so good. That things are just flying off the shelves, and that's kind of a thing I wanted to mention as well. Is there can be sometimes not being patient about your writing career is a positive. So I have 13 books out. After 13 books, most people would be better off in terms of their monthly income from writing than I am. So I'm last month was about $150, which is not very much for, it's an average of about a little over $10 a book. That's not very much, really. So in that case, it can be useful to not be patient, because you can kind of look at why things aren't going the way you want them to go and what you can do to improve. And as long as it's pushing you to kind of take further steps, that's okay to be impatient.
Yeah, it's going back to what you want. Is one of the problems, the issues I'm aware of that is preventing me getting cash in hand out of writing is that two of my books are short story collections, and short stories don't do as well as novels. People who like short stories will also read novels, but people who read novels won't always read short stories. So it's a smaller market. And I'm aware of that. So I have to be more patient with those. There's nothing that I can do about that. They get good reviews. People like them when they read them. It's just accepting that they're never going to be runaway bestsellers. They're not going to get the huge amounts of money until I've already made it famous and people are buying them because I wrote them rather than because they want to read short stories. And similarly with certain genre choices. If I wanted the best time to money return, there are bits of romance that there is almost a set flow chart you can follow. And that's what the readers want. So if you fill in the gaps, and filling in the gaps, if you've got the flow chart for the story already, is half the battle. I could crank those out faster until the point where my brain turned to porridge because I just wasn't enjoying what I was doing. And at that point, I might as well be getting a really well-paid job, because writing in a genre you don't like isn't going to get you as much money as certain other jobs. So possibly one of the antidotes to feeling you should be doing better is to focus on the advantages of what you're doing. Is there a lot of jobs I've done whilst I was a student and so on that I enjoyed a lot less than writing, or that were a lot more stressful than writing. And I like being a lawyer, but compared to writing, it's phenomenally stressful. And authors very rarely meet people who are having an utterly terrible day. But as a lawyer, you meet them on an almost daily basis. In 2 days in a row where someone isn't on the verge of falling apart is quite rare when you're a lawyer. So possibly you have to accept that your standards have to be different with a writing career from what they are with other careers. Because the career progression of most jobs is you start, you get a pay rise, you get another pay rise, maybe you get a company car, maybe you get a parking space, maybe you move from a cubicle to an office with actual walls, maybe you move to a corner office, maybe you move up to the floor that has like expensive carpet rather than nylon stuff. Maybe you get people who are now reporting to you, so you're moving up the corporate ladder, as it were. Whereas as an author, you're never going to get someone giving you those trappings. So you have to I suppose, work out what your career progression is going to be in those terms, because it's not, even in jobs people go into for the money, it's not just you get more money, you get more money, you get more money, therefore you're more successful. There are other things you get, whether it's more days off, health insurance, a company pension, or whatever, that aren't about pure amount of money in your paycheck every month. So possibly one way to be more patient is to focus, not all the time, but when you really start to feel stressed with the way things aren't going, on the things that are going right for you. The fact that you've got this job that lets you do X, whatever it is that you particularly enjoy about writing. So focus on the advantages of being a writer, and maybe consider the way that that has become more, this, as I've become a better writer, I can do the same thing faster, which means because I'm not working to set hours, if I can write the next 1,000 words in 35 minutes rather than an hour, that's 25 minutes of free time. Whereas in any other job, if you've got an hour to go until the end of the day, you do all your work, and you can't just get up and go, well, toodaloo, I'll see you tomorrow. Most jobs, you're there until 5, so you're there until 5. And someone can come up to you at 4:55 and go, there's been a problem, we need you to stay on.
That's usually the time they do turn up as well. 4:55 on a Friday is usually the
yeah, exactly, sort of we've done the server's making a clunking noise, and there are all these red lights flashing. Can you just look at it before you nip home?
Yeah.
All these things. And so with writing, your career progression can be getting to the point where you need to push yourself to do the work less. So if doing the same amount of work takes you less time, that's progression. And maybe that's not getting you more money because you're still publishing at the same rate. You've not yet managed to convince Stephen King to endorse you on Oprah, but you're getting more of the advantages of that flexibility that self-employment can offer.
Yeah, and the alternative as well is to consider what would happen if you stopped. So rather than letting things peter out, just consider stopping entirely. So if you're writing for half an hour a day or something, and you find it difficult to motivate yourself, try to imagine what would happen if you stopped completely and never tried to be a writer again. Is that something that you would, like, there are two paths. You can say, well, this writing lark isn't for me. I'm going to stop and I'm going to do an extra half an hour on my day job instead. And if that's something that makes you gasp in horror, well, then you know that even though it might be a pain in the neck right now, you can keep pushing yourself and you will have a benefit out of it. You will get something out of it, even if monetarily it never pays off.
Dan, this is the thing. There is a myth floating around that surfaces occasionally in writing communities, usually when people are talking about whether someone's a real writer or not, which is one of those horrible discussions that comes up to shoot holes in anyone who doesn't fit someone's preconceived notions, and probably stopped more promising writers than anything else. But that if you're a real writer, then if you've got an hour left to live, you're going to spend some of it writing. So that is it. Well, no, if I had an hour left to live, I wouldn't spend it on writing. Well, I might do if I had something that I really wanted to write, but I'm going to spend that on whatever I feel like. And you can be a writer and write once a week. You don't have to be shockingly profitable to be a writer. You don't have to be writing every single day. You don't have to be writing even for publication. Some writers, John Scalzi, he writes in the mornings, but then he has the afternoon to do other things. That works for him, but that doesn't mean that if you're not writing for half a day, you're not a real writer. That someone who writes on the weekends can't be just as successful. You can write wherever you want, whenever you want. And if it isn't working for you, then scale it back.
or scale it up. I mean, work out. Maybe you thought that your reason for writing is one thing, and you're finding your, hitting against it the whole time, and it's not satisfying you. It may be that your real reason for writing is something other than what you think it is. So you may say, okay, what I want to do is I want to write the novel that's in my heart, that, is an expression of my soul. And then you keep looking at your KDP dashboard and going, but I'm not earning any money. Yeah, but you're saying your goal is to write something that's an expression of your soul. That's not necessarily going to make any money, whereas something that's just a Dan Brown kind of thing might. Yeah. And maybe that's really where your goal is, or vice versa. You might look at your books that you've got out where you're earning thousands of dollars and go, this is not satisfying me. I'm just writing in order to get paid, and that's not doing anything for me.
Yeah. You can test it. You can test some of the things for what your mind might equate with success. You take pseudonyms. If you don't know whether fame matters to you or not, then consider, unless your work that you're working on is part of a series, it wouldn't really work, consider releasing it under a pseudonym. In terms of making money, it doesn't matter whether you're using your real name or another name. There are some genres where certain names anecdotally do better. Like female names potentially do slightly better in romance than Bear McBairson would. But consider releasing this project that you're pouring your love into under a pseudonym and never telling anyone that it's your book. If you're fine with that, then probably you're writing because you love the story and because you want to get paid. But fame isn't necessarily a big part of it. Whereas if your thought at releasing your book under someone else's name causes you to go, yeah, then part of why you're writing that story is to be recognized, because so that people will know that you wrote it and be impressed, startled, whatever. So yeah, definitely try to work out more about why you write. Because I write because I like it. I like putting the stories down. I've role played for decades, so I like telling stories. I like hearing that people enjoyed my stories. So it's about getting the stories out. And if I suddenly couldn't write again, I'd probably be okay with that if I could still role play. But if I couldn't tell stories in any way, I'd go absolutely turn into one of those muttering people who wanders the streets talking to trees just to tell the stories. So part of my success is people saying that was a good story. So for me, the hardest part isn't getting the sales. Waiting for sales. The hardest part is waiting for someone to actually tell me what they thought of the book. So books where I don't have a review, it's like, well, people have bought it, but no one's reviewed it. I know that the number of people who review a book, unless they absolutely loathed it, is below 1%. So getting a review before you've sold 100 copies is actually statistically quite good going. But someone buying the book and not having put a review up, particularly in the context of the fact that I can read a standard novel in a couple of days. So if I bought a book, then I've probably finished it in under a week. And so my brain goes, well, someone bought a copy of your book 9 days ago and they haven't reviewed it yet. Obviously, it was mediocre. And that's not true. It's just that they haven't finished it yet, or they're not the kind of person who reviews, because 99 out of 100 people aren't. But waiting for someone to actually tell me that the book exists, that they've read the story and have noticed the story enough to comment, is the hardest part for me, really.
Mm.
And that is something about which I can do nothing. There is nothing other than brute patience to get over that gap between releasing your book and someone deciding to comment on the fact that it exists.
Well, you can have your mailing list.
Well, you have your mailing. I suppose you can ask your mailing list to tell you, but if they don't respond, there's nothing you can do.
Sure.
You can't.
Yeah.
You can't go. So you can't. Well, I suppose you could track your readers down and ask them to their face, but doorstepping your readers, just like sort of. So, did you like the book? They're going to go, nah, you're a scary man.
Anyway, we've hit about an hour, so we've overrun a little bit. So I think we should probably wrap up.
Yep.
Was there anything you wanted to add at the end, Dave?
Don't think so, no.
Grant. Well, thank you all very much for watching, and we'll see you on the next one.